Ethan Miller had not planned to go home again, not to Seattle, not to the quiet street where every memory still felt too neat and carefully arranged. But when his phone rang late at night and he saw his mother's name after years of distance, something inside him tightened before he even answered, and the moment he heard her voice, low, shaken, nothing like the steady woman who raised him, he knew the past was no longer finished with him. She did not cry at first, she did not accuse anyone, she only said she needed him, that the truth had finally become too heavy to carry alone, and by morning Ethan was on a plane, staring out the window as clouds passed like pieces of his childhood breaking apart, replaying old images of his father Daniel laughing too loudly at family dinners, fixing broken shelves, teaching him how to drive, always calm, always sure, always preaching about doing the right thing, and those memories followed him all the way to the front door of the house where he grew up, a house that looked untouched by time but felt strangely hollow when he stepped inside. His mother Linda hugged him tightly yet briefly, as if holding him any longer would crack her open, and led him into the living room where the furniture sat exactly as it always had, but the warmth was gone, replaced by a quiet tension that made Ethan feel like a stranger in his own history, and when he finally asked what was wrong, she didn't rush to answer. Instead she went to the kitchen, poured coffee she barely drank, and sat across from him with hands folded like she was preparing to confess not anger, but grief. She told him that some truths don't explode, they unfold slowly, that she had lived for years with small doubts she pushed away because believing in her marriage felt easier than questioning it, and as Ethan listened, his chest felt tight, each sentence making him uneasy without fully understanding why, until she mentioned a name from the past, Rachel Adams, and suddenly the room felt colder. Rachel had been everywhere when Ethan was younger, barbecues, holidays, birthdays, always friendly, always close, always treated like family, and hearing her name now made old memories shift in shape, small moments suddenly sharp, his father's laughter lasting a second too long, conversations stopping when someone entered the room, jokes Ethan never quite understood at the time. Linda explained that the betrayal was not sudden or loud but quiet and patient, built through long talks and shared feelings that slowly crossed lines without anyone raising an alarm, and while she did not describe what happened in detail, Ethan understood enough to feel the weight of it, the sense that something sacred had been treated carelessly, that the family he trusted had cracks beneath its surface long before it finally broke. He felt anger rise, not in explosions but in a heavy burn, because betrayal, he realized, does not only hurt the person it is done to, it reaches everyone who believed in the promise being broken, and as Linda spoke, Ethan noticed how tired she looked, how many years she must have spent doubting herself, questioning her instincts, waiting for honesty that never came, and when she admitted she had found proof that his father could no longer deny, Ethan felt something collapse inside him, respect, certainty, innocence, and he stood up, pacing the room, suddenly unable to sit still with the image he had carried of his father for decades. Later that night, unable to sleep, Ethan went down to the basement searching for answers he wasn't sure he wanted, opening old boxes of letters, receipts, forgotten objects, until he found envelopes tucked behind a storage bin, letters never sent or never opened, all addressed in his father's handwriting, all connected to a past that should have stayed closed, and holding them felt like holding evidence of a life lived in shadows, proof that people are capable of being kind and careless at the same time. As dawn approached, Ethan sat alone with the weight of it all, realizing that part one of the truth was not just about infidelity, but about trust misplaced, silence chosen, and the painful understanding that the people who shape us most can also disappoint us beyond repair. And as the morning light filled the basement windows, he knew nothing would ever feel the same again, because once the perfect image starts to crack, you can never unsee what lies beneath it. Ethan did not sleep much after that night, and when morning came, the house felt even quieter, as if every wall had learned how to keep secrets, and as he sat at the small kitchen table with his mother, Linda finally began to speak more openly, not with anger, but with the calm tone of someone who had already cried every tear she had, explaining that the betrayal did not begin the way people imagine, with passion or drama, but with small choices made again and again, choices that slowly shifted loyalty from where it belonged. And she told Ethan how his father Daniel and Rachel had started talking more often. How simple check-in calls turned into long conversations, how messages meant for a friend slowly carried thoughts that should have been shared only within a marriage, and how she noticed the change not through obvious signs but through absence, the kind where someone is physically present yet emotionally elsewhere. Linda explained that Daniel had begun coming home distracted, less patient, less interested in ordinary moments, and when she asked what was wrong, he brushed it aside with tired smiles and empty reassurances, and because she trusted him, she believed him, not realizing that trust was becoming the very thing he hid behind. And as weeks became months, Rachel's presence grew stronger, not just as a person but as a shadow that followed every conversation, every family gathering, every shared memory, and Ethan felt sick as his mother described moments that once meant nothing to him. The way Rachel laughed at Daniel's jokes, how she always seemed to understand him without explanation, how she stood just a little too close, details that now carried weight, making the past feel rearranged. Linda admitted that what hurt her most was not just the fact of betrayal, but the awareness that it was planned in silence, shared privately, and protected from the truth. And she said that Daniel often spoke about feeling unseen, misunderstood, as if marriage had made him invisible. Yet instead of facing those feelings honestly, he chose comfort over responsibility, choosing someone who asked less of him and expected nothing permanent. And Ethan felt anger tighten his chest because he understood too well that loneliness does not excuse disloyalty. Linda then told him about the day everything changed, a quiet afternoon when she found proof by accident, not by spying, but by trusting her instincts for once. And when she confronted Daniel, he did not deny it, he only looked defeated, as if relief had followed guilt, admitting that he had crossed lines he never imagined crossing. And that moment, Linda said, felt worse than any argument they had ever had, because truth without effort cannot heal what effort already damaged. As Ethan listened, he felt his image of his father shrink, the strong voice that once shaped his values now sounding weak in memory, and he realized that betrayal does not always wear the face of cruelty. Sometimes it looks like avoidance, fear, and selfishness disguised as confusion, and he couldn't help but wonder how many family moments, how many smiles and old photos, were built on lies he had never been allowed to see. Linda's voice softened when she said she had tried, after the truth came out, to repair what remained, not for Daniel, but for the years they had built together. Yet every attempt felt hollow, because once emotional loyalty is given away, trust struggles to return, and what remained between them was not love but caution, not warmth but careful distance. Ethan stared at the window as she spoke, noticing how the world outside continued calmly while their family story unraveled inside the house, and in that moment, he understood that this chapter of betrayal was not just his parents' story, but part of his own, shaping how he would see love, loyalty, and honesty. And as the afternoon light faded, he felt a growing resolve form inside him, knowing that the next step would require facing his father directly, because silence could no longer protect anyone, and the truth, once uncovered, demanded to be confronted. Ethan met his father 2 days later at a small cafe near the highway, a neutral place chosen because neither of them could face the family house without tension. And when Daniel walked in, Ethan barely recognized the man who had once filled every room with confidence, because his steps were slower, his shoulders bent, and his eyes avoided contact like they carried weight he could no longer hold. And as they sat across from each other, silence settled between them, thick and uncomfortable, until Daniel finally spoke, saying he never planned to let things reach this point, that he had convinced himself it was harmless at first, just conversation, just shared thoughts. But Ethan cut him off immediately, telling him that harm does not start when people notice it starts when someone chooses secrecy over honesty. And Daniel's face tightened as if the words struck deeper than any accusation. The conversation moved quickly, emotions rising without shouting, as Ethan pressed him for truth not excuses, asking how long it lasted, why he allowed emotional closeness with Rachel to grow while ignoring his marriage. And Daniel admitted that he felt weak, that instead of solving problems at home, he escaped into a tension that felt easy and validating. And hearing this so plainly, Ethan felt both anger and disappointment, realizing that his father's failure was not passion, but cowardice. Daniel tried to explain that he never meant to replace Linda, that he always returned home believing he could keep both worlds separate, but Ethan told him that dividing loyalty already means choosing betrayal, and that sentence seemed to break something inside Daniel, because he lowered his head and finally admitted he had lost control long before he lost the truth, and that he was ashamed of how far he allowed things to go. Ethan remembered how often his father spoke about facing mistakes with courage, and now watching him struggle to defend his actions, those old lessons felt hollow. And he told Daniel directly that the damage went beyond marriage, that he had damaged the trust of his own son, and Daniel's hands trembled when he apologized, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, as if he already understood that some apologies arrived too late to heal. The conversation ended without closure, without comfort, only honesty, and as Ethan left the cafe, he felt a strange emptiness rather than relief, realizing that confronting the truth does not instantly fix pain. It only removes the illusion that once protected it. And later that night, alone in his childhood bedroom, Ethan reflected on how his view of family had changed, how heroes turn human when secrets surface, and how disappointment forces growth whether one is ready or not. He thought about future relationships, about how easily trust can be broken when feelings are hidden instead of shared, and though the disappointment in his father remained heavy, he also recognized a quiet lesson forming within him, that strength is not avoiding temptation, but choosing honesty when comfort feels easier. And as the house creaked softly around him, Ethan understood that this meeting marked the end of denial and the beginning of something far more difficult, rebuilding himself from truths he could no longer ignore. The days after the revelation felt like walking through a storm for Emily. The secret she had stumbled upon weighed heavily on her heart, twisting her emotions into a mess of confusion, anger, and longing. She couldn't stop thinking about how her father's life, once a source of comfort and safety, had hidden such human frailty, and it forced her to question the boundaries between love, desire, and loyalty. At the same time, she noticed how her own feelings had changed, how she longed for someone to understand her, someone to hold her in the quiet nights when her thoughts were loudest, yet the idea of betrayal haunted her, shadowing every connection she tried to make. Across town, Michael, her father's old friend and confidant, seemed to sense her unrest. His eyes lingered a little too long, his presence comforting yet charged with unspoken truths, and Emily felt a flutter of emotion she had never expected. She wrestled with her attraction, feeling guilty yet alive, realizing that life was messy and human hearts often followed paths that logic couldn't explain. A sudden message from Michael one evening, casual yet intimate, offered her a chance to step out of the suffocating silence of her home and into a world where her emotions could be explored safely, slowly, and with someone who understood the delicate balance of heartbreak and hope. They met at a quiet cafe, the tension between them palpable yet gentle, filled with smiles that held 1,000 words they couldn't yet speak aloud. Emily discovered in Michael a mirror of her own vulnerability, someone who had faced betrayal in his past and emerged stronger, kinder, and more attuned to the subtle needs of others, and with him, she felt a spark of something new, tender yet undeniably real. Their conversation stretched late into the evening, laughter mixing with moments of profound understanding, and Emily realized she was starting to trust again, allowing herself to hope that love didn't have to be perfect to be healing. Meanwhile, at home, the quiet aftermath of her father's mistakes lingered like a shadow, reminding her of the lessons she had learned about human weakness, forgiveness, and the importance of moving forward without losing herself. Slowly, Emily began to rebuild her own sense of worth, setting boundaries, embracing her own desires responsibly, and acknowledging that life's most profound connections often emerged from the most unexpected circumstances. As she walked home that night, hand in hand with Michael, she felt the weight of the past lift slightly, replaced by a cautious optimism, and she realized that love, in all its complexity, could be a source of both healing and exhilaration. She knew the journey ahead would be filled with difficult conversations, moments of doubt, and perhaps lingering shadows of the past, but for the first time in months, she felt the exhilarating promise of possibility. Her heart, once constricted by secrets and disappointment, began to expand with cautious hope, understanding that the mistakes of the past did not define the future, and that true intimacy was built on honesty, patience, and mutual respect. That night, as stars twinkled above the quiet streets, Emily allowed herself to dream, not of perfection, not of a flawless life, but of a love that was real, messy, and deeply human, and in that moment, she understood that moving forward meant embracing both the scars and the sparks that made her who she was. With Michael by her side, the future seemed less daunting, filled with laughter, gentle touches, and shared secrets that were hers to cherish. She walked into the night feeling lighter, her steps confident, knowing that even in a world shadowed by mistakes and misunderstandings, hope and love could find their way in the most unexpected, tender ways. The lessons of betrayal, heartbreak, and longing were no longer chains around her heart but stepping stones toward emotional resilience, and as she looked up at the moonlit sky, she smiled softly, ready to embrace the unpredictable journey ahead, ready to write the next chapter of her life with courage, heart, and the quiet thrill of a love that had found her when she least expected it, leaving the past where it belonged but carrying forward the wisdom, empathy, and tender hope that could transform her world.